The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Yes, hello, good evening. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews. We're back for another live stream, live reading tonight. Welcome, one and all. It is very lovely indeed to have you here. We're going to be continuing with Zbigniew Brzezinski's book from 1970. It's called Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technatronic Era. And I was just saying in the chat before the live stream began that the more I think about this book and study it and learn from it, and bear in mind we're only 63 pages into it and it's 320 odd pages long. So this is still quite a ways to go yet. But the more I learn about it and think about it and study it, the more crazy, wild, amazing, insane, as Parallel Mike just said in the chat there, it seems. It's an amazing book. He told us so many things back in the 70s. He told us about the internet, that it was coming, that there would be a time where information was shared seamlessly across the world. He told us about that. He told us about the irrelevance of nation states, that the new breed of elites were going to be internationalist bankers and businessmen and academics, and that they would have interests that are above and beyond the nation state. He told us that there was going to be weather modification used for warfare, weather warfare. He told us that there would be some sort of wave modulation used to target whole areas that would impair people's ability to think and use their brains properly. And this would be used as part of warfare as well. It's quite astounding what he said in 1970. It's the kind of stuff that if you started up a YouTube channel and started talking about it, that you'd be labeled conspiracy theory. You might get a little wrong think banner put under the video to correct your viewers, to tell them that the things you are saying are unacceptable and very, very wrong, and you're a naughty boy for thinking and saying those things. Yet Zbig can write a book and publish it in the 1970s and just tell you as it is. And we're going to see another example of that in the little preamble ramble that I have prepared for you tonight, because it's strange how these academics, these elites, they can say the truth. They can tell us, say the quiet part out loud is another way to put it. And yet when those of us who try and draw attention to that and point it out and raise a flag and say, you know, they said this thing in that book over there, we should probably pay attention to that and worry about it, we get slapped with that pejorative phrase, that all-encompassing, dismissive, you're a conspiracy theorist. A phrase that was created by the FBI, I might add, or the CIA, one of those guys, but, you know, one of the alphabet soup agencies. That phrase was created to give people a means by which they can switch off their critical thinking, that they can dismiss and get rid of having to look at evidence, having to think critically, having to pause and reassess and readjust their worldview in light of new information. Instead of that, it's, oh, that's conspiracy theory nonsense, and I'm going to go back to watching my sports and eating my Doritos, playing my computer games, and living my life and living for the weekend and get back on the hamster wheel and earn some money and pay some taxes, and then go and blow off some steam at the weekend by getting ridiculously drunk and then just doing it over and over again, and then dying eventually at the end of it. That is the reality for a lot of people out there, which is very sad. So don't shy away from talking about these things and pointing them out when you have heavy hitters such as Zbigniew Brzezinski to back you up and to point to and to say, look, this isn't my wild theorizing and speculating and concocting of conspiratorial delusions to explain things. I can point to a book that was published, a mainstream book by a guy who served in the White House, no less. And he said, this is what is happening. It's not my opinion. It's Zbigniew Brzezinski's opinion. What do you think about that? It gives your ability to talk about these things to other people a little more weight, a little more gravitas, if you will. And it is why I started the channel in the first place, because when I started realizing that there were books out there that talked about all these things, such as the one I always use as an example is the paperclip conspiracy. When I first learned about that, I thought, what in the heck? How can that be true? And then, of course, there's books written about it. So you grab one of those books, you find it in a secondhand shop, a couple of pounds. You know, you go home, you read it, and you think, why doesn't everybody know about this? How come I'm 30 odd years old and this is the first I'm hearing about the paperclip, Operation Paperclip, otherwise known as the Paperclip Conspiracy, which is the name of the book by Tom Bauer that I reviewed on the channel in the early days, back before I had a nice microphone and a sexy webcam and some fancy graphics and a logo and all that sort of stuff. It's pretty good to go back and watch these old artifacts of the early days. They are nowhere near as polished and entertaining as well. I shouldn't call myself entertaining, but I think I have certainly gone up a few notches in the entertainment category since I began, where I was just talking into a 10-year-old laptop with no microphone about a crazy book that I just read. But things have come a long way. But yeah, the Paperclip Conspiracy, Operation Paperclip, it's a real thing. It exists. And if you don't know about that, you got to go and look it up. It's mainstream knowledge now. It's admitted. It's accepted. Enough time has passed that the files, some of them, are declassified, and we know a lot about that situation. But as is wont in the game of conspiracy and world control and elites planning and their machinations, they like to classify documents for 10, 20, 30, 50 years. And only when so much water has passed under the bridge, when so many of the people involved are senile or dead, are we, the public, allowed to know the truth about the things that have happened. And so you got to keep your eye on these declassified documents, and this is why it's important to study history and to look backwards to understand the present and see where we are at. So we're looking at this book today. It's a 1970 publication. We're in 2025 right now, 55 years down the road from when this book was written. And honestly, it reads as though it could have been written yesterday. And so if you haven't caught up with the previous parts in this series yet, please do so at some point when you have time. I just said after the last live stream on Friday, part 4, if you only have time to catch up on one of the previous parts, make it part 4. In my opinion, it had some crazy stuff in there. So it had the weather warfare. It had the admission about the elites that I mentioned at the start. It had the acknowledgement of this pulsating kind of harp type technology that could impair the brains of entire countries full of people, you know. Quite amazing stuff. And we have only just finished part 1. This book is divided into 5 parts, and we've only finished part 1, and it is already a mind blower. Previous things we've discussed as well in the earlier parts are the nature of this very interesting symbol on the front. Some might call it a sigil. I haven't done much sort of deep diving into what that might be or what it could mean, but it looks to me like some sort of magic, demonic, devilish kind of sigil. And there are other examples of devil sigils which match that, although this one is way more complex and intricate and grand than the examples that we looked at in a previous live stream. But also, we had a little look at the context around the quote which opens the book, which is taken from a novel called Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse. And that quote talks about the hell that occurs when 2 generations, 2 religions, 2 cultures are smooshed together and they are caught between 2 ages. That's where the title of the book comes from. And this quote says that when this happens, it amounts to hell. Human suffering is increased, and quite an amazing quote to use to open a kind of a geostrategic assessment, an academic assessment. The book is right. It's academic. It's very well referenced. All his points are sourced. There's a lot of footnotes at the bottom. There's a lot of footnotes, end notes at the end of the book as well. So to open with a quote from a Jungian kind of psychedelic novel, which was controversial back in the day for its depictions of sex and drug use, is just very interesting. There's occult and layers to this man and his book, and the quote that opened it, and the symbol on the front, as I just said, and who knows what else as well. So this is why the more I think about it, the more intrigued I am by the book and learning about it, and I'm wanting to continue. So I'm very much enjoying this series, and it's very good indeed to have you here for the live stream. We got Slow Boy Whiteboard in the chat, just dropped in. He's going to come back later, but he said, thanks for the reviews. You're very welcome. It's good to have you here, and I hope you enjoy the replay. We got LJ, we got Parallel Systems, Frank Lennon as well over on YouTube. And then we've got Heidi and Turbs over on Rumble, which is very good indeed to have you here as well. So deep, honest, heartfelt thank you for tuning in live. I do have a little goal that I would like to, by the end of this series on Between Two Ages, hit 2K subs on YouTube, if at all possible. So if you're willing to like, comment, share, subscribe, do that good stuff at any point during the live stream, help boost those numbers, make number go up. You know, it's the game that we play in this reality. We have to make number go up, except age. We don't want age to go up. We want that to either to stay where it is or go down in most cases. But there's a lot of numbers that we try to make go up, and channel subscribers is one of them for me. And so, yeah, if you can help out a little bit in that way, that would be lovely indeed. So cheers. And let's get on with tonight's preamble ramble. It's not a long one. We're going to be looking at a few web pages and then diving straight into the book, because I'm very eager to get into it and start reading. We got to pick up the pace, because as I said, we've done 4 live streams, each of them 2.5 hours, and we've only done 60 pages. That's like 15 pages per live stream. Which, if we continue at that pace, this is going to be the longest series that we've done on the channel so far, right? And we've covered books that are much longer than this in fewer videos. So we do need to pick up the pace a little bit. But let's go over to the article camera. Let me move myself a little bit. Oh, that's fine. Okay. So the first page, the first thing I wanted to talk about is this book. It's called The Crisis of Democracy. Now, I have touched on it a little bit in one of the previous preamble rambles, but I wanted to focus in on it a little bit more right now. Because this word democracy I've talked about previously, if you look at the Wikipedia page for the word democracy, it tells you that there's no agreed upon definition and nobody really knows what it is. There's all these different theories and ideas about what it is and what it constitutes, and yet you can hang out with people and you talk to them and they'll tell you that democracy is the greatest system that's ever been invented and we need to defend it. And all these people in other countries are jealous of our democracy and they want to destroy it and take away our freedoms because, you know, that's what people tend to want to do. They want to destroy things they don't have that they would like to have, right? So this democracy thing, what is it? What does it mean? What is actually going on underneath this label, if anything, right? So we talked a bit about that in a previous live stream, and I thought the title of this book, The Crisis of Democracy, stands out because it's not very often that people will admit that democracy itself is in some way flawed or has a fault to it, or it's kind of a what do you call it, like a holy cow. I know that's not the right phrase, but it's one of those things that you cannot question, that people just hold in high esteem. And if you question it, then you're an anarchist and you're evil, or you are some sort of patriarchal maniac who wants to go back to living under cruel and horrific kings and queens and go back to the medieval ages and the dark ages and all that sort of thing, right? So it's good to look at democracy. And as I mentioned before, what do the elites say about it? What do the academics say about it? What do the mainstream presidential advisors say about it? And so for this book to be written and published in 1975, as you can see here, pretty curious. So what's it all about? Well, The Crisis of Democracy, and it's got a subtitle, On the Governability of Democracies, is a key report written in 1975 by Michael Crozier, Samuel P. Huntington, more on him later, and Joji Watanuki for the Trilateral Commission. I'm just totally guessing at the pronunciation of these names, but it looks like that guy's Japanese, which would make sense because the Trilateral Commission is all about fostering and standardizing and encouraging relations between America, Europe, and Japan, right? So you've got this. I presume this Crozier guy, yeah, he's French. Huntington is American, and Joji Watanuki is Japanese. So it makes sense that they would come together and collaborate on the writing and the publication of this book. But it was a report in the first place, and then it was republished as a book by New York University Press. The report observed the political state of the US, Europe, and Japan, and says that in the United States, the problems of governance, quote, stem from an excess of democracy. Too much democracy. We need less democracy for our democracy to continue being fantastic and wonderful and state-of-the-art and cutting edge in terms of how to run a country and how to have a political system, etc. It's a great, too much of a good thing. It's all about how much you have, right? So an excess of democracy is what they were identifying in the book. And they called for actions, quote, to restore the prestige and authority of central government institutions. So they recognize that too much democracy has led to, I suppose, some disillusionment among the citizens, and we need to bolster that the authority of these government institutions. Otherwise, anarchy and terrible things happen in anarchy. Everybody knows that. So what's the overview of the thesis there? Well, they're talking about Europe, and they're saying that in the 1960s, Western Europe, their governments were overloaded with participants and demands, which the highly bureaucratic political systems were unable to handle, thus rendering the societies ungovernable. So it was all to do with participants and demands. Democracy is everybody's involved, right? Everybody gets a vote, everybody gets a say, and that we go with what the majority wants. And they're saying, well, there's too many participants in democracy, right? We need to cut out some of these participants because when people get involved, they have a lot of demands. And it reminds me of a phrase that's used in the corporate world quite a bit, and it'll talk about how things have been. Well, they'll say it. I think the phrase goes something like, "It's been designed by committee." And this will be where you've got too many people and they're all throwing their opinions and their ideas and their preferences and their experiences in, and you can't come out the other side of that process with anything useful or efficient or effective because it's like too many cooks spoiling the broth. It's that similar kind of concept. So it sounds like that's what they're saying. We've got too many participants in these democracies and it's causing problems. And then, of course, too much bureaucracy. And this is making them ineffective and the societies become ungovernable. It also says that the report points to a political decision made by France that was made in, quote, semi-secret, without open political debate, but with a tremendous amount of lobbying and intra-bureaucratic conflict. Intra-bureaucratic conflict. So acknowledging that. And I love it how they say France, right? France made a decision. Like, who is France? Who is this person, France? Because it says a political decision was made by France. What it means is a political decision was made by that group of people who get together and call themselves government and plunder everybody else. And they did it in secret, and they did it without political debate. In short, they did it without the consent or the awareness of the people who they govern. Revealing the true nature of this system, which is decisions get made behind closed doors, handshakes under the table, briefcases are exchanged, nods, winks, all that kind of stuff goes on. And then what is presented to the public is this sort of Punch and Judy facade of a democratic political process. Okay, so but it's always funny how when instead of naming the people or the administration or the group that did it, it's like France. France made a political decision in semi-secret. So you always got to watch the way these things are worded. But they're admitting in this book that democracy is a bit of a sham. That's what it sounds like to me. And they also turn their sights on the United States, and they say that the problems of the US in the 60s stemmed from, quote, the impulse of democracy. So, again, just like saying France made a decision, apparently democracy has impulses. Not the people, not the political class, not the administration that's currently in control. No, it's just democracy, this abstract political concept. It has impulses, right? And it's just like the impersonal forces, which so many of these useless eliters write about in their books. These impersonal forces that are driving us forward, and we got to be aware of these forces, and there's nothing we can do about them. They just exist. There's nobody behind them. There's nobody pulling the strings. There's nobody planning and making these things happen. It's just an impersonal force, right? It's the same kind of rhetoric that they're using here. But apparently there was the impulse of democracy to make government less powerful, which doesn't make any sense. Why would democracy... right, okay, let's just grant that democracy as a concept can have impulses. Why would it want to make it like government, the outcome of having a democracy is government, and the point is that we elect the government to have powers to do stuff on our behalf. Why would democracy want to make the government less powerful? But anyway, I'm not an academic geostrategist, Harvard graduate, so maybe it's just beyond my ken, as they say. But democracy had an impulse to make government less powerful, but more active, right? So less power, but more paperwork. Less impact, but more meetings. It's kind of like the corporate world in the present day. It's like less actually getting things done that are productive and useful and helpful, and more paperwork and pencil pushing, or pixel pushing as I call it these days. So it's that kind of trend. And then also to increase its functions and decrease its authority. So I just totally interrupted that whole sentence. I'll read it in its entirety. The book says that the US problems in the 60s stemmed from, quote, the impulse of democracy to make government less powerful and more active, to increase its functions and to decrease its authority. And the conclusion was that these demands are contradictory. Well, yes, they are, obviously. So if you can work out what that gobbledygook means, then you deserve to go and study at Harvard. But continuing, it says, to remedy this condition, quote, balance needs to be restored between governmental activity and governmental authority, right? So we need more authority, basically, because the activity's there. There are many people employed in this group calling themselves government. They are giving themselves nice bonuses and benefits, and they have second homes and holiday homes, and they have all this good stuff going on. So the activity is not a problem, but they've got no authority. Right? They need, where does authority come from? Well, it comes from people's belief in it. As Larkin Rose, in his excellent book, calls it, it's the most dangerous superstition. So basically what they're saying is when we need to increase governmental authority is we need to increase people's perceptions and their belief in the government's authority. Because it doesn't have any intrinsically and in actual reality. It's just a bunch of people calling themselves government. They have a monopoly on violence. I'll admit to that. They do have the power to put you in a cage or send a goon round to your house, kick your door in, whatever it may be. They do have these sort of avenues of kind of, what's the word that I'm looking for here? I don't want to call them powers because they're not powers. It's more like they just have these abilities that no one else has. They have rights. They call them rights. We have the right to put you in a cage, but if I want to go and put someone in a cage, I'm not allowed to do it. So it's all about shaping people's minds, which Government, the word comes from control. Govern, gubernare is the Latin control, and ment is comes from the Latin word for mind. And if you don't believe that, I actually have an English to Latin dictionary right behind me, and I bought it for the purpose of looking that up. And it is true. Take my word for it. I'm not going to grab it off the shelf and show you right now. I'll do that on another live stream. But it's an old English to Latin dictionary. It's got the word gubernare in there. It's got the word mentis, and that's where government comes from. It means control the mind, mind control. So the whole point is to control the minds of the citizens, get them to believe that this group has authority, and then they go along, they pay their taxes, they follow the rules and obey the laws and put an X in a box every 4 years, etc., etc. So that's what they're saying they need to do. They need to increase the mind control. And they also say that the effects of this excess of democracy, if not fixed, is going to be lead to instability, and that will lead to the faltering of international trade. Oh no, our industrialists and capitalists won't be able to exploit the poor working conditions and lack of human rights in other countries, and by offshoring all their production to factories over there for their cheap slave labor, right? Oh no, our international trade is at risk. Oh. And then budgets, they might not be balanced anymore. And also the US's hegemonic power in the world as well might not be maintained because of this too much democracy. So that's the thesis of the book. It doesn't mention what it has to say about Japan, interestingly, on the Wikipedia page. The reception of the book, how was this received? Well, critics have pointed out that many members of the Trilateral Commission subsequently had roles in the Carter administration and have been influenced by the report. Specifically, Zbigniew Brzezinski restated the conclusions of the report in an op-ed for the St. Petersburg Times. That being, I presume, it's an American newspaper. I was going to guess that it's a Russian newspaper, but no, it doesn't make sense that it would be called that. English title. St. Petersburg is in Florida. And then also Noam Chomsky has cited the report as an example of the type of hostility towards popular democracy and tactics for suppressing it that the quote-unquote liberal wing of the state's capitalist ruling elite tend to favor. So there you are. Some people are not happy with it. Noam Chomsky, a very mainstream, often lauded and celebrated academic, did some good work in the early days with his book Manufacturing Consent. Did some terrible work in the later days by saying everybody needs to get injected with experimental mRNA concoctions in order to have access to public places. And that was back in 2021, I think, or 2022, thereabouts. So yeah, questionable guy. Started off well, and it went to shit in the end. Kind of like, I don't know, Star Wars or something like that, you know. But that's The Crisis of Democracy, 1975 publication. Doesn't give us much more on the Wikipedia page, unfortunately, but I would love to get a copy of the book and read it in its entirety. So I looked it up and I thought, all right, let's see how much this costs. And what would you know? £220 for a hardcover and £129 for a paperback on Amazon. And it's a short book, 212 pages, right? So needless to say, I won't be buying a copy of that anytime soon, not from Amazon at least. Maybe there are cheaper ones somewhere else, but they are jacking the price up, absolutely. Because I think, again, as I said, it's one of these books where the elite tell you what's going on, and they tell you the things that if you say these things, you get labeled a conspiracy theorist. You might get a strike on your account for violating community standards, because apparently a lot of these platforms have the community standards of no truth allowed. So it would be good to get a hold of that and read it at some point, but not right now. But you can get it and read it in its electronic form. This is a link that I grabbed to the Wayback Machine. It's actually at the bottom of the Wikipedia page. So it's not like they're burying it in that they don't want anybody to read it. I think they just punish the people who are interested in these kinds of books by extorting them and jacking up the price just to make you feel the pain of buying these books, right? But a quick look at the contents. We've got pessimism about democracy and challenges confronting democratic government. Then there's a section on Western Europe, a section on US, and a section on Japan. And then the conclusion. The dysfunctions of democracy, the delegitimation of authority, the overloading of government, the disaggregation of interests, and parochialism in international affairs. And there's a phrase here, anomic democracy, that I'd never heard of. The rise of anomic democracy, consensus without purpose. I'd like to read it. I definitely would like to read it indeed. But I'm not going to read it on a screen. I'm not going to read it right now. But there it is. If you want to read it on a screen, you can do so at the Wayback Machine. trilateral.org/docs/crisis_of_democracy.pdf. They don't hide these things. They make them available, and they're quite open and upfront and honest about their plans if you can be bothered to have a look for them and read them. There you are. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is I wanted to have a look at this guy, Samuel P. Huntington. He was a co-author of the book we just talked about. He did also write The Clash of Civilizations, which I've shown. I've got a copy of that up here. That's cheap, a couple of pounds. You can get that on Amazon. And his name popped up a few times in connection with Zbigniew and with the Trilateral Commission. So I thought, all right, let's see who this fellow is and what we can learn about him. So this is his Wikipedia page. He's dead now. He died in 2008, but he was an American political scientist, advisor, and academic. He looks like a kindly old kind of grandpa type person there. I'd expect him to be handing out Werther's Original, which, if you don't know what that is, it's a candy that we have here in Britain, or a kind of hard butterscotch type of sweet. He doesn't look too bad. He doesn't look as evil as some of the people and the faces that we have to torture ourselves with on this channel during our explorations. But yeah, he was pretty active for many, many years. Had a good long life. Let's see, how old was he when he died? 81. Not bad. But it tells us that he spent more than half a century at Harvard, and he directed Harvard's Center for International Affairs. So, as we've learned from Alan Watt and others, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, set up by Lionel Curtis and many people from the Milner Group, which was set up and was born out of Cecil Rhodes's will, left to the establishment and formation of Rhodes Scholarships, which were a cover for the secret society, which he wrote of in the earlier iterations of his will, where he said, let's start a secret society with all this money that I got from the Rothschilds. It became the Royal Institute for International Affairs, and then very quickly after that was established, Council on Foreign Relations over in the US was established, and then Centers for International Affairs were set up all over the world. And these are these kind of think tanks. They coordinate their views, they recruit, they groom, they teach the ruling elite what to do, and they coordinate because they're all over the world, right? But there's one of these in Harvard, the Center for International Affairs, and this fellow, Samuel Huntington, was the director there. I guess for half a century. I don't know for how much of that half a century he was directing the Center for International Affairs, but I think probably it was probably close to 50 years. I don't know why they don't just say 50 years. I think it sounds more impressive if they say half a century, right? But moving on, it says that during the presidency of Jimmy Carter, Huntington was the White House coordinator of security planning for the National Security Council. He's known best for his 1993 theory, The Clash of Civilizations. In that book, in that theory, he argued that future wars would be fought not between countries, but between cultures. And as Alan Watts says, and I've been thinking about this recently, culture is your cult. And people often don't connect the words cult and culture and think about them. One of them, obviously negative, meaning, oh, you got to stay away from that. It's a cult, don't drink the Kool-Aid. That guy, the leader of the cult, he's just going to get all the men and the women in there and like bang everyone's wives and then get you all to kill yourself on the equinox so that the aliens can come and pick you up and take you away to, wherever it is. Don't join a cult. Bad. Cults are bad. Culture, on the other hand, Yeah, great. We got to protect culture. We have to mix it all up and welcome other cultures from other places and respect those and make sure people from other cultures are feel at home and have a space where they can express themselves and celebrate their culture. So it's a very common concept, an everyday concept, an everyday word, but people don't think too much about what it actually means, what it signifies, and what it says. And when I heard Alan mention that and point that out, that the word culture literally means your cult or sounds your cult, I thought that was a really important point. So Huntington is arguing that cultures are going to be fighting each other in the future, not countries. And this kind of aligns with Zbignew's point of view in the book, as well as others such as the first global revolution. It's in there as well. The nation states are kind of irrelevant, right? Countries are not where it's at anymore. We've kind of grown out of countries. We'll still allow the soap opera and the fantasy and the fairy tale of nations to go on, because some people are very attached to that, right? They like their flags and their anthems and their national food and all that sort of stuff. So they'll allow that fairy tale to continue, but actually the game is much bigger, much broader, and the players are not so much interested in nations anymore, as we're going to find out later in this article. Huntington admits that. But this is a key part of his thesis. It's not about countries, it's about cultures. And he says, and this is a spicy bit, he says that Islamic civilization is going to become the greatest threat to Western domination of the world. What's really interesting about this, and this isn't my observation, I got this from somewhere else, but I forget where, so I apologize that I can't give credit where it's due. But what's interesting about this is that if most of us, like right now here in England, okay, we got quite a bit of thought police action going on. If I were to fire up an Instagram live, for example, and started saying that Islamic civilization is the greatest threat to Western domination of the world, maybe if I dropped the domination of the world bit and I just said Islamic civilization is a threat to the West, pretty quickly I'd probably have some police knocking on my door telling me that I can't say that because it's unfriendly, it's bigoted, it's racist, it's insightful, it's hatred, etc., etc., etc. Yet Huntington can write a book and come up with a thesis and put it out there, and not a problem. I suppose that's the kind of stuff you could get away with saying back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, right? Although the book that he published was much later than that. We're going to find out. Yeah, 1996 he published that book, right? So as recently as 1996, it was okay to say that the Islamic civilization is a threat to the West. But nowadays, in 2025, you can't say that. Islamic civilization is a benefit. It makes the West better. It enhances the West. It is a total boon. And we are very lucky and blessed. And I'm very grateful personally that Islamic civilization is enriching my culture and my society and my country. And I say my culture, my society, my country, but I actually don't identify with any of those things. I don't really identify with a nation or a specific culture, apart from like buying and reading books. That's my culture. That's the cult that I'm part of, the bibliophile cult. But that's the narrative now, and it's pretty hot at the moment that you can't really kick back against minorities in your country. You have to welcome them and celebrate them and be happy about them being there. Although Huntington was warning about this back in the 1990s in his book. So yeah, kind of strange. But carrying on with the article, it says, according to the Open Syllabus Project, Huntington is the second most frequently cited author on college syllabi, that's a plural of syllabus, for political science courses. So pretty influential, quite oft cited, means that his books are talked about in universities. They are probably included as part of curriculums, and this is mainstream stuff, in other words. And I just noticed as well that here on this picture of him, where he's looking kind of all friendly and grandfatherly, he's actually at a World Economic Forum meeting. You can see the logo in the background there, kind of blurred out. But that's him in 2004. So yeah, influential chap. His early life and education, well, not that interesting. Apart from he graduated with a distinction from Yale at 18 years old. And then he got his master's degree. And then he got his PhD at Harvard. And then he began teaching at Harvard at 23 years old, which is crazy. Just crazy to me, because when I think back to what a mug and a moron I was at 23 years old, that this fellow was out there teaching people at Harvard with a PhD at 23. Yeah, it's pretty crazy to me. But yeah, he's an academic through and through, from cradle to grave. And in his academic career, he was a member of Harvard's Department of Government from 1950 until he was denied tenure in 1959. And along with Zbigniew Brzezinski, who also was denied tenure, he moved to Columbia University in New York. So we did read about Zbigniew getting denied tenure, and Henry Kissinger was given tenure. And Zbigniew was like, screw you then, I'm going home. But instead of going home, he went to Columbia University and took Huntington with him. Huntington's first major book was The Soldier and the State, which was controversial when it was published, but at present is regarded as the most influential book on American civil and military relations. I couldn't quite find out why it was controversial back in the 50s when it came out, but first edition copies of that are pretty pricey. I had a quick look. And he also, as we just learned before, was the co-author of Crisis of Democracy. And it says here that in 1977, his friend, Brzezinski, their buddies, who had been appointed a national security advisor in Jimmy Carter's administration, invited Huntington to become the coordinator of security planning for the National Security Council in the White House. So it was on Brzezinski's invitation that Huntington was given, landed that role as a coordinator of security planning for the National Security Council. There's a section here on notable arguments that he's made, and the thing that stood out to me that I thought was worth mentioning was a bit here about in the 80s. So it says that he was an advisor to the South African regime in the 80s, and this regime used his ideas to craft its total strategy to reform apartheid and suppress resistance. He assured South Africa's rulers that increasing the repressive power of the state, which included police violence, detention without trial, and torture, could be necessary to effect reform. So I'm like, what? I read that a few times. So he advised that, yeah, you're going to have to do more violence and detention without trial and torture if you want to reform apartheid. The reform process, he told his South African audience, often requires duplicity, deceit, faulty assumptions, and purposeful blindness. And he thus gave his imprimatur to his host's project of reforming apartheid rather than eliminating it. So imprimatur kind of means... I just looked it up and I can't remember what it means. That's why I highlighted it. But it's sort of like permission in a way. It's kind of like permission is the best word that I can think of right now. But they used a fancy word to say he basically gave the green light to this project of reforming something that should have just been gotten rid of in its entirety. And then he did a book called The Third Wave. Then he did The Clash of Civilizations, which we just talked a little bit about. The bit that stood out to me here and was worth mentioning is that Huntington's influence upon U.S. policy has been likened to that of historian Arnold J. Toynbee. The similarity is that Toynbee's controversial religious theories about Asian leaders during the earlier 20th century is controversial, just as Huntington's theories about cultures clashing with each other. So just interesting to see Arnold J. Toynbee's name being dropped there. Of course, he was the research professor at the London School of Economics and very close to the Milner Group, writing many of their history books and their authorized histories and their authorized accounts of how things panned out and their causes behind things, right? There's a section here as well, which is Who Are We and Immigration. So this is his last book. He said he wrote a book called Who Are We? And in this book, he said that the meaning of American national identity and what he describes as a cultural threat from large-scale immigration by Latinos, which he said could divide the United States into two peoples, two cultures, and two languages. And remember that when two peoples, two cultures, two religions come together, they get stuck between two ages, and hell is what results as because of that situation. He wrote in that book that he called for America to force immigrants to adopt English and the U.S. to turn to Protestant religions to save itself against the threats of Latino and Islamic immigrants. So pretty controversial stuff. 2004, he was saying this. You wouldn't get away with saying this right now. You'd get sacked very quickly, even if your job had nothing to do with policy or the the academic disciplines or politics or whatever. You could get sacked for saying this stuff, even if you just work in, I don't know, McDonald's, or if you just work delivering the mail. Whatever, it's mad the times that we're in now. But he was saying this stuff, and again, if you do want to say this stuff, at least you could point to a book and say, "Look, this guy said it, not me. I'm just telling you what he said," and try and skirt the censorship and the ban hammer falling on your head that way, if you want to risk that. But of course, this book was panned. It was said that it should not be considered social science, that the ideas were unforgivable, and it was a polemic rather than a work of scholarship. So lots of criticism went his way for writing that one, unsurprisingly. And then this bit down here caught my eye. It's a section entitled Other. Apparently, Huntington is credited with inventing the phrase Davos Man. And if you follow the link from Davos Man, it takes you to the World Economic Forum page. And this phrase that he invented refers to global elites who, quote, have little need for national loyalty, view national boundaries as obstacles that, thankfully, are vanishing, and see national governments as residues from the past, residues, whose only useful function is to facilitate the elite's global operations. So that's a direct quote from Huntington. That's a quiet part out loud right there. And he wrote that in 2004, Dead Souls, the Denationalization of the American Elite. And that's, I think, an article in the National Interest. The magazine, I think, or the publication called the National Interest. And it says here that phrase, Davos Man, refers to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, where leaders of the global economy meet. So I don't know if more of the quiet part is being published in these kinds of Wikipedia pages now, but the page that we looked at on, was it the page on Zbigniew Brzezinski? Had a further reading, and it recommended Patrick Wood, and it recommended Anthony Sutton. It just seems to me that there's more things being admitted on Wikipedia at the minute. And this idea that there is a global economy and it has leaders, and that Samuel P. Huntington admits that there's no need, the elites don't have need for national loyalty anymore. They've transcended it. But they'll keep you and I arguing about the red team and the blue team and all the shenanigans, and they'll carry on that pantomime for the average Joe and Jane in the street, whereas they're off. They have no need for national loyalty. Boundaries are obstacles that are vanishing, and national governments are residues from the past, right? Very interesting, very revealing. So he's got a whole bunch of publications if you want to check out those. And then there's some further reading at the bottom, a whole section on Clash of Civilizations on his thesis there. And plenty of other good stuff to look at as well, but nothing that stood out to me. But yeah, the Davos Man, you can credit Samuel Huntington for coming up with that phrase. And that's the end of our preamble ramble tonight. I told you it was going to be a short, sharp, quickie. As always, if you want to support the broadcast at any point, please feel free to do so by sharing and commenting and liking and subscribing. That's a great way to do it. You can also click on allmylinks.com. It's pinned at the top of the chat for your convenience. If you want to find out what all my links are, I mean, it does what it says on the tin. And you can send crypto, you can grab the guitar music bundle, follow me on social media, send me an email, listen to my music, and donate in a number of ways. And of course, would be very good indeed. Why am I going backwards now? Oh, that's weird. Now we're going forward. No, now we're going backwards again. Sorry, I'm just giving people an epileptic overload. My tab browsing forward and backward commands seem to have got mixed up. So let me just see what's going on there. See if I can find a tab that I was just looking for. No, it's just cycling through the same bunch of tabs. But the other thing you can do as well, if you want to support or get involved any further, is you can join the book club, which is on the school platform. And we meet every week, and there is a bunch of replays in there that you can't get anywhere else. 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television, Surveillance Valley, and also The First Global Revolution. We're reading through that every Wednesday at the moment, and that is quite an amazing book as well. It complements Between Two Ages really nicely with the ideas and the arguments and the propaganda. You know, that's good stuff. And you can sign up to the book club. You can go over here to the classroom, and then you can have a look at grab the replays. First Global Revolution, we just finished chapter 6, which was called The Human Malaise. And yeah, it's a great book. Again, it's another one. It's written by a think tank. It's a piece of propaganda. But reading it, picking it apart, seeing how these lies are constructed. This last chapter was focused in particular on young people. And this is the lies and the worldview that's been used to galvanize the young to support things like net zero, like to believe in things like climate change, to sign up to things like, well, not that the young people have signed up to Agenda 21 and the Sustainable Development Goals, but for them to think that those efforts are good and not question them and not be skeptical and go along with them, right? The younger generations are being targeted by a massive propaganda attack. And this book openly says it's targeted at young people, and it has the poisonous ideology and worldview right there in its pages. And we're reading through it. So that's another good way to get involved and support me and the show. And as you can see, there's an under construction sign up here at the top right, because I am working on making this even better and putting more fun, useful, informative, educational materials in there as we move forward. So that's the end of today's Preamble Ramble. Thank you very much for hanging in there with me. We've got a few comments over on YouTube that I'll have a look at. Mindhack's here. What's going on, Mindhack? Good to have you here. Alan Watt, CTTM. Hello, Melissa. Good to have you here as well. And Lee Blunt, late again. Naughty boy. But don't worry, you can always catch up on the replay. It will be there for as long as my channel exists. I don't really feel these days. I'm not too worried about having the channel taken down, because recently James Corbett got his YouTube channel reinstated, and a bunch of others as well who say way spicier, more controversial things than I do. I don't really touch on the spicy, controversial stuff. I'm not in it for clicks, and I'm not too concerned about making number go up. I want to make number go up, but I want to do it in the grassroots word of mouth way that is meaningful and that really matters, rather than the just, sign up for this little app that's going to make all the numbers explode, but actually there's nobody out there. It's just empty empty numbers. I want real people to get involved, and the people who are interested in this sort of slower paced, careful studying and surveying of the books and what's written down and what the elites told us in their own words. I think it is healthier for the mind, the heart, and the soul to learn about these things in this way, rather than getting all pent up on cortisol and adrenaline because somebody's telling you about all the terrible things that the globalists are doing, and Alex Jones ranting and screaming into the microphone and getting your anxiety levels to increase so that you buy his fantastic supplements. I don't like that way of doing things. I think slowing it down, taking our time, and trying to approach things with some humor and some critical thinking. I can do a bit of that. I'm not super logical and super academic, but I do like to pick these things apart and call out the bullshit and the propaganda where I see it. So that's our way of doing things over here, and it's very good indeed to have you all aboard the ship. And if you know other people who might enjoy this pace of learning and studying, then please feel free to send them my way. It would be good to have them on a future live stream. Just seeing as well, we got Doris K in the chat. How are you doing? Good to have you here. Also late. Terrible, but it is a Friday night, so I mean, it's amazing that anybody shows up on a Friday night, to be honest, because it's Friday night. That's the best night of the week, isn't it? Everyone loves Friday night. Got the whole weekend ahead. The possibilities are endless, right? I'm gonna have a sip before we get into the book. Tammy's here late as well. Goodness me, what is going on tonight? What have you all been doing? It's like you've all got lives or something. Jobs and families and hobbies. How dare you? Don't worry, the replay will be there. Oh, I forgot to mention as well, it's a bit too late to mention this, but there'll be a pinned comment with the timestamps. It's way too late to mention that. I feel silly for bringing it up now. Right. Let's go over to the book cam and try and get comfortable. Sometimes when I start reading and I haven't got comfortable, I get a bit of a crick in my neck because I'm so I got to move things around, get a comfortable reading position, and then we can get into it and get started. Mindhack says, don't sell yourself short. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. There is a bit of discipline involved in what I do, but that's partly why I do it, because if I didn't do these live streams, I probably wouldn't get these books read. So it's mainly for my benefit that I do these, and then it just happens that we have the technology in this day and age to share it with other people and bring them along for the ride. So I'm very glad. It gives me a lot of hope that there are people out there, that there's anybody out there interested in this stuff. It's fantastic. It does give me a lot of hope. It's not just me on my own reading the books to thin air. So as I said, we're continuing tonight with part 2. There's 5 parts in this book. Let's recap those. Part 1 was the global impact of the Technatronic revolution. The summary of part 1, I would say, is it's pretty terrible on the whole. He didn't talk about much good stuff. He said we're all going to end up living in a global, he called it the global city, right? He dispensed with the idea of a global village or a global neighborhood. And he's like, no, it's not going to be that, because a village or a neighborhood implies that people are close and they look out for each other and they stick together and they know each other. Nope, it's going to be a global city. Nobody's going to know each other. They're going to be engaging in a kind of, it's more like transactional. It's more like people just seeing each other as economic units that have a function instead of real whole human beings with lives, dreams, fears, passions, talents, and all that good stuff that we are endowed with. So that was kind of the one aspect of part 1. He also talked about the increasing ability to control the personality of our children. Yep. He talked about the malleability of humans, meaning increasing, so that things that were previously held sacrosanct might be undermined and gotten rid of with regard to what a human is and what it means to be a human. He talked about television, a means by which the living rooms of other countries could be invaded. He did use the word invade. And that was a great section because it reminded us that media and screens are weapons, and they're weapons of war. And the old way of going over the top and running across no man's land into a hail of machine gun fire, that's not war. That's old school. We don't do it that anymore. The new battleground is the mind. The new battleground is hearts, souls, humanity, and the individual. And he does say, I was trying to look up that quote where he talks about the impact on the individual, but he basically says that this new awareness, global awareness, is going to overwhelm the individual, and many people will thus become kind of paralyzed because they're just inundated with all this news from all these different places that they can do nothing about. And it has this effect of really just neutering and paralyzing the individual. And that is very dangerous, because it is only by the individual fully becoming who they are and embracing their capacity for creative output that we have any hope of getting through the situation that we're in. So he did talk about that too. And he finished this section admitting to the, let me see if I can just pull out this bit here, which was the emergence of transnational elites being composed of international businessmen, scholars, professional men, and public officials. These new elites are not interested in national boundaries. Their perspectives are not confined by national traditions, and their interests are more functional than national. And that is exactly what Samuel P. Huntington admitted to with the Davos man, his concept of the Davos man, right? Which is a good phrase to use. I always like using the phrases that they provide us. Davos man is a good one. World controllers is another one. Aldous Huxley uses that in his book Brave New World Revisited. I've just been mining that for quotes for a little project I'm working on, and he says that this is the upcoming age is the one of world controllers. That's what he says. So yes, the nations and the countries and the flags and the emblems and the songs and the figureheads, that's old hat at this point. You're kind of like you're watching DVDs when the world's moved on to streaming, Netflix. That's kind of what it's like. It's old technology. It was technology and techniques used for the purpose of dominating and controlling big groups of people, but those techniques and those technologies are now increasingly becoming redundant because they have new techniques and technologies, namely the internet, the links, the nets, the web, and the chains, the blockchains, all that stuff, links in the chains, nets and webs. They tell you what it's all about and what it's all for right there. But anyway, let's get into part 2, which is the age of volatile belief. The age of volatile belief is intimately linked with the impact of the technotronic revolution on existing ideologies and outlooks on life. What man thinks is closely related to what man experiences. Well, yeah, I mean, it's intimately, inextricably related, right? What you think, your thoughts become actions, they become beliefs, and that has the placebo effect. It even has the nocebo effect, right? If you believe you're sick, you're probably going to get sick. If you believe you're healing and you're getting better, then that has an impact. So yeah, I think he's kind of closely related is an understatement here, in my opinion. The relationship between the two is not causal, but interacting. Experience affects thought, and thought conditions the interpretation of experience. Okay, so it's not causal in his view. I don't know about that. I think there might be a little more causality there than he's willing to admit. If you think about, for example, the teachings of Mark Passio, which aren't really his teachings. He always says there's nothing new under the sun. He's just telling you stuff that's been occulted, which means hidden. But one of the Hermetic principles, the very first Hermetic principle, is the principle of mind, being that mind is the cause of everything. And this is similar to theistic worldview in that God, not saying God is mind, but that God is not a physical entity. God, through the power of mind, created, everything. And that's one kind of narrative that's out there. But the primacy of mind being the causal factor for all of the things, that's makes sense to me, because all I have to do is look around and realize that pretty much everything around me, apart from like the trees out the window, the house, the books, the shelves, the laptop, the screens, the lamp, all of it, the gadgets, the gizmos, all of this stuff was in the mind before it was manifested in reality. It all started in imagination. It all started as an idea, as a creative idea. Oh, we could build this thing that's going to do this, and this is what it might look like, and this is what we want it to do, and these are the materials we have, and then you take some action, and then you create the thing, and it becomes a real thing in reality, right? So it goes idea in the mind, followed by action, leads to creation, leads to effect. So, I don't know. I think there might be a little more to the story. I don't know. I think there might be a causal relationship there worth exploring. But let's continue with Zbig and find out what he's getting at. Today, he says, the dominant pattern seems increasingly to be that of highly individualistic, unstructured, changing perspectives. Institutionalized beliefs, the result of the merger of ideas and institutions, no longer appear to many as vital and relevant, while the skepticism that has contributed so heavily to the undermining of institutionalized beliefs now clashes with the new emphasis on passion and involvement. You see what I mean about how it could have been written yesterday? That describes the internet. The internet leads to individualistic, unstructured, changing perspectives. Everyone has their own little bubble that they operate within. They have their chosen talking heads that they trust and they follow and they subscribe to, and they support, right? And we curate our input in a very highly individualistic way. And I'd say no two people have exactly the same chosen inputs. Some people would be like, well, I listen to Corbett and a bit of Last American Vagabond and a bit of Derek Bros. Another person comes along and says, no, I don't listen to any of that. I listen to The Gray Zone and I don't know, Mark Passio. I don't even know the landscape of talking heads because I'm not that involved in it. But you see what I'm saying, right? You curate the ones you want to listen to, that you agree with, that you identify with, and then you become you develop this individualistic perspective that no other person really has. It's just you and your personal curation of inputs. But he wrote this in the 1970s before the internet was a thing, although he knew the internet was coming because he told us about that earlier in the book. But of course, this leads to the institutionalized beliefs. They get undermined. They are undermined. How do you say that? I'm tying myself up in a grammatical knot there. They become irrelevant. People let go of them. People say, "Oh, the beliefs of the church, it's old hat. We get rid of that. We're not interested in it anymore. We got new ways of doing things now. We're heading into the scientific worldview, the scientific outlook, right? As Bertrand Russell called it. So yes, these old traditional ways of doing things are no longer vital, no longer relevant, and the scientific skepticism that comes along with this emphasis on the materialistic worldview, that leads to people letting go of beliefs in things such as the spirit world, such as the soul, such as God, angels, demons, whatever your belief structure might be. More people turn away from that and turn towards the scientific materialist view, which is that it's all just a kind of random, chaotic, bubbling along of inert space matter that self-organizes into complex life. And then the emphasis becomes on passion and involvement. So continuing, the result for many is an era of fads, of rapidly shifting beliefs, with emotions providing for some the unifying cement previously supplied by institutions, and with the faded revolutionary slogans of the past providing the needed inspiration for facing an altogether different future. Again, could have been written yesterday, couldn't it? The emphasis on emotions, my lived experience, how I feel inside tells me who I am, and the world around me has to bend to that sense of who I feel I am, right? This is the whole ideology and explanation and justification for self-identifying as a furry or a non-binary zim, zer type pronoun person, right? The rainbow clownfish people. It's all about how you feel. And if you feel that you are one way, then that means that you are. And if you feel you are one way on a certain day and you feel you are a different way on another day, then that's fine too. So it's all this kind of subjective, relativistic worldview, a celebration of the subjective and the relativistic experience of people, which just leads to absolute chaos. It really does. And then also this turning to the revolutionary slogans of the past. My brother just got back from Japan, a trip to Japan, and in Japan he brought back with him, he smokes, and he had all this packets of cigarettes and some rolling tobacco, and it was called, I think it was just called, the brand was called Che, and just had a picture of Che Guevara on the packaging. And I don't know anywhere else where you can get this brand of cigarettes and tobacco, but that's where you can get in Japan, and he thought they were good, and he brought some back, and he was smoking those, right? I tried a few, I had a few beers with him a while back, and yeah, so the branding of faded revolutionaries and their slogans still happens. You see people walking around with the hammer and sickle logo on their bags or hats or pins. You know, that's pretty easy to spot as well on university campuses. So yeah, it was happening in the 70s, still happening today. But continuing, several broad phases can be discerned in the formation of the collective human consciousness that conditions our response to reality and provides the framework for intellectually structuring that reality. The great religions of recorded history were crucial in establishing a perspective that linked man's individual preoccupation with his inner life to a universal God who was the source of a standard of behavior binding upon all. Reality was God-given, and the line between the finite and the infinite was blurred. So a lot of past tense there. The ideological phase associated with industrialization and the spread of literacy involved a much higher propensity toward social activism and emphasized more immediate goals, as defined either in terms of the nation or some other collective good, the external condition of man being the primary focus. Yeah, so that's focusing on the external material conditions rather than the internal spiritual, I won't say conditions, but the internal spiritual state of man is de-emphasized. And instead you get your Fabian socialists coming along saying we need a minimum wage, we need to get women the vote and put them in the workforce and get them paying taxes and that sort of thing. Continuing, activism called for a more explicit definition of our reality, and systematic, even dogmatic intellectual frameworks were meant to meet that need. Yeah, so dogmatic intellectual frameworks is right. That reminds me of like the social justice warriors, right? And they're like pushing, and it's made its way into the corporate realm, and it's pushed from the top down. Inclusivity, right? We must be inclusive. What about people who don't want to be inclusive? Well, no, we don't include them. Well, that's not very inclusive, is it? You see, you can refute it very quickly by asking a few simple questions. But this is what's pushed from the top. I was on a job and I had to travel. I was working quite far away from the office where my team were based. And there was an event on a specific day where they insisted everybody on the program, 50 people or so, had to come in and be in the office on this day for an inclusivity session. It was a 3-4 hour struggle session on diversity and inclusivity. Now, they didn't insist I went into the office for anything else. There was no other requirement for me to be in the office. The work was fully remote. Otherwise, apart from this one day of inclusivity and diversity training where they insisted I travel. Smith has just entered the chat saying Jesus is not inclusive. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not so familiar with Jesus and his teachings, but it doesn't mean anything to say be inclusive, right? It's a kind of corporate buzzword. People think they know what it means, but they go along with it, and it's used to bully people as well and to browbeat people into groupthink, essentially. And that was the point that I did not bring up on the day, right? I didn't bring it up on the day because I didn't want to ruffle the feathers and get sacked. But you have to be inclusive, and everyone has to be included. But if you don't like inclusivity, you can't be included. So it's just stupid. It is good fun to talk about it and laugh at it, though. Smith says, include Satan. And it means include Satan in everything. There you go. Yeah, if you're looking at it from a biblical perspective, it's relativism, right? Everybody's view is just as valid as everybody else's. One man's good is another man's evil. It brings you to moral relativism, and that is just absolutely chaotic. It really is. But let me carry on. So we got these dogmatic intellectual frameworks, and the next section is just underneath. He says, in our time, the established ideologies are coming under attack because their institutionalized character, which was once useful in mobilizing the relatively uneducated masses, has become an impediment to intellectual adaptation, while their concern with the external qualities of life is increasingly felt to ignore the inner, more spiritual dimension. Commitment to individual action based on moral indignation and stimulated by a much higher level of general education has become a substitute for highly organized activity, though it avoids the passivity and indifference to external reality that was characteristic of the pre-ideological age. I need to clear my throat a second, excuse me. There we go. Lee Blunt says, I've read that the Fabian Society invented the Labour Party in the 1880s. I could believe that. If you go to the playlists on my channel, we did the Fabian Freeway book from 1966, and we did the Milner-Fabian Conspiracy. I'd say Fabian Freeway goes more deeply into the history of the Fabian Society. But yeah, they were absolutely instrumental in the creation and the building of the Labour Party. And every single Labour Prime Minister that we've had in the UK has been, I think, a member of the Fabian Society all the way through. I think I'm correct in saying that. It might be all of them bar one. I think it's all of them. Someone can fact check me on that. Yeah, Smith says the Fabian slow plan, tortoise. Yes, that is it. It is the incremental, stepwise process of permeation and penetration and changing things from within gradually. And it works. But continuing, compelling ideologies thus are giving way to compulsive ideas, but without the eschatology that characterized other historical eras. Yet there is still a felt need for a synthesis that can define the meaning and the historical thrust of our times. In that search, the dominating passion is equality among men, with institutions, within societies, among races, and among nations. Equality motivates both the rebels in the universities in the West and in the East, and the new nations in their struggle against the better established and richer ones. Interesting that he characterizes the new nations as struggling against the established and the richer ones, and that in, for example, the First Global Revolution, they talk about the need for the richer, established, developed countries to stop being productive and to stop their economic activities, basically, in order to let the other countries catch up. So if the new nations are struggling against the established and richer ones, and we're being told as citizens, as people who live in these established and richer ones, that we are no longer to enjoy the benefits of cheap energy. We instead have to submit to sustainable austerity and stop eating steak, stop going on holiday, and pay ridiculous taxes on everything as the price of you name it is going up. Apart from entertainment, and that remains cheap, and alcohol remains cheap, and cigarettes, that's ridiculous. That's going parabolic, but which is surprising, actually. You'd think that allow us to continue poisoning ourselves, but the alcohol's still cheap. So there you are. As long as you buy it in a supermarket and drink it at home. Not if you want to go to a pub, where you might meet other people and talk to them about what's going on, then you're going to get rinsed for a pint of alcohol. But yeah, you can buy it for cheap and drink it at home, no problem. So some might say that these new nations that are struggling against the established and the richer ones, maybe they're winning. Maybe they've made some progress or headway in that struggle. I don't know. I'll leave that for you to decide, but it's an interesting way to characterize that as a struggle. But continuing, he says, this emphasis, as well as the fear of personal obsolescence, and that personal obsolescence is caused by automation, by the landscape, the working landscape changing. Okay, people feel like their skills are not needed anymore. You might have some practical, real-world skill, and it's just been taken over. And you end up you become the useless class, as Yuval Harari describes them, and you get given drugs and computer games, essentially. But that's another theme that pops up earlier in this book. That useless class also pops up in the first global revolution, showing you that thread, that continuity from Zbigniew Brzezinski by way of the Club of Rome to Yuval Harari. And then, of course, he's talking at the World Economic Forum, talking to Russell Brand, and he's just this kind of like, oh, Yuval Noah Harari's books, they're so amazing. And yeah, well, maybe not. But there's a continuity there. That's my point. Alan Watt, CTTM, Melissa says, might be something in tobacco which blocks the effects of the chemicals and metals coming down from the spraying. I think you might be onto something there. I smoked all the way through the Big C, right, the COVID, and got sick once, and that was probably maybe not even related to whatever it was that was making people get sick then. But I remember reading studies that showed that smokers were getting sick less than non-smokers. I remember sharing that around and sending it out there because this study was like, oh, these smokers are not coming down with the symptoms that were being packaged up and rebranded as a new disease back in those days, the good old days. And so I was happily smoking away at that time, being like, I'm feeling great. I'm protecting myself from whatever this this novel condition is that's going around, rebranded flu, But yeah, I think there might be something to that. I'm often reminded that there's a medicinal use to it. There's like a ritualistic use among Native Americans, and it's not something they use day in, day out as a way to let off steam and just to manage anxiety, which is how it became in the West. It was more like we'll use it as part of a ceremony for a specific purpose, as a kind of like, I don't like the phrase plant medicine, but as a sort of plant medicine. So yeah, I think that's a really good point worth mentioning, and interesting that there doesn't really appear to be an equivalent use or practice associated with alcohol. That seems to just be kind of destructive and harmful wherever it pops up. So continuing, this emphasis, this emphasis, as well as the fear of personal obsolescence, causes concern in many that the new post-industrial age will require even greater differentiation in skills, competencies, and intellectual preparation, thereby widening the disparities within the human condition at a time of ever intensifying global interaction. Yeah, that's a big part of his thesis, and I think a big part of why he chose to open the book with that quote that says, it's going to be hell, is that he's saying that let me find that quote. So those of you who might be new to the stream or haven't watched the previous ones, no, I'm not just making it up. It's after the introduction, isn't it? Sorry, here it is. Yeah, there's the quote. Steppenwolf, he says, human life is reduced to real suffering, to hell, basically when two cultures and religions overlap. And he calls that Between Two Ages. So he's named the book Between Two Ages after this quote from Hermann Hesse's novel Steppenwolf, which talks about human life being reduced to real suffering and to hell. So that's another, obviously deliberate, it's not accidental. But he talks about how the interlinked international nature of things leads to people coming apart at the seams, right? So there becomes this localized destabilization as things are getting plugged in and connected internationally. He talks about that earlier in the book. So it's not a paradox exactly, but it's just this transition that people are undergoing, whereby, and you can see it in the young, right? Hyper worried about the environment and this climate catastrophe that they've been told is underway. And it causes them to not get married and not have children and to carry on living at home, playing computer games and taking drugs in their parents' house, and there's economic reasons for that being the case as well. It's very hard to get money together to even get on the housing ladder in this day and age. But you can see what he's describing in reality. And he was talking about it back in the 70s, way before Greta Thunberg was a twinkle in the eye of her two actor parents, before they gave her the Rothschild boat to sail the world on and scare the world's youth with tales of melting ice caps, etc. But yeah, that's it. So the global interaction is intensifying and people are becoming unmoored from their traditions, from their institutions, from their beliefs, from their spiritual connections to God, because of this pincer movement of hyper concentrated news and media from around the world, with the scientific materialism that comes along with just, you're just another animal, you're just a bag of chemicals and biological processes, and there's nothing more to the human being than that, as well as the undercutting of any traditional cultural cornerstones that might lead to strong families and communities being built on them, right? I'm not sure if that little point made sense there. Let me have a swig. I'll take a pause and drink some tea and think about it. I forgot to pour myself a glass of raw milk tonight, so I'm on tea instead. Okay, next part is part 1, the quest for a universal vision. Of course, the solution is going to be a one world universal ethic, a universal code of practice, universal rights for everybody, right? The standardization and equalization of everybody everywhere under the same one world system of control. So he starts with a quote. Man came silently into the world. And that's a quote. The footnote is number 1. Let's see, we'll look that up. I've never heard that quote before. So I want to know. This is Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, The Phenomenon of Man. So he's claiming that that man came silently into the world. My son didn't come silently into the world. He was actually crying. Well, he was actually chewing on the finger of the midwife. He was just gnawing on her finger, and then he started crying very soon after that. Definitely not silent. And my wife was definitely not silent. So I don't know about this idea. Maybe it's a philosophical idea or something. I don't know. Some highfalutin Harvard graduate type stuff. But continuing. But though his coming is shrouded in mystery, in the sense that we still know little about the actual beginnings of human existence. Yeah, because it's been hidden and occulted and removed from us and locked away in the Vatican archive somewhere and maybe some other archives around the world. But I think it's known by someone somewhere. I think that would be Alan's assertion, I think, that our history is kept in archives and we're not allowed access to it, right? We don't have privilege. It's kept for the few. Who want to dominate. It's the dominant minority who have that knowledge and that information, I think. But Zbigniew says, from earliest known history, man has given evidence of an intense yearning to understand himself and his environment. However crudely and primitively, man has always sought to crystallize some organizing principle that would, by creating order out of chaos, the old order ab chaos, relate him to the universe and help define his place in it. So it's just innate within man to want to make order out of chaos, because the universe is chaos. Nature is chaos. It's accidental. It's unplanned. It's mechanistic. It is unthinking. It is unconscious. It is just random mutations happening accidentally with no plan, no purpose, and no reason or rhyme to it, giving rise to complex life, if you can believe that. Despite the disappearance in earlier times of entire cultures, human evolution or social development has involved both an expansion in man's awareness of himself and his fellows as a human entity endowed with certain common qualities, and an increasingly systematic intellectual effort to define and organize his external reality meaningfully. I don't think that's a new thing. I think that's probably as old as humanity. There has thus been at work what Teilhard de Chardin has called, quote, an augmentation of consciousness, a stream whereby a continuing and transmissible tradition of reflection is established and allowed to increase. In terms of the entirety of human existence, that stream may indeed be a short one, as the critics of the notion of historical progress readily point out. Nevertheless, recorded history does provide strong evidence of growth, often halting and uneven, but growth nonetheless, in man's consciousness of a common human fate, of certain universal cravings, and of common moral standard. And there's a footnote here on the page which says, we are talking here about our history, of our historical civilization. Claude Levi-Strauss is otherwise quite right in pointing out that, quote, it is forgotten that each of the tens or hundreds of thousands of societies which have existed side by side in the world or succeeded one another since man's first appearance has claimed that it contains the essence of all the meaning and dignity of which human society is capable, and, reduced though it may have been to a small nomad band or a hamlet lost in the depths of the forest, it claimed has its own eyes rested on a moral certainty comparable to that which we can invoke in our own case. That's a hell of a sentence. He also says, but whether in their case or our own, a good deal of egocentricity and naivety is necessary to believe that man has taken refuge in a single one of the historical or geographical modes of his existence, when the truth about man resides in the system of their differences and common properties. That whole quote is from a book called The Savage Mind from 1966, page 249. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The comings and goings of civilizations and cultures, your cults, the different cults, are they all just systems of control manufactured by a priesthood with the knowledge of how to do such a thing? Or have some of them been organic and actually grassroots and ground up? You know, it's an interesting question to explore for sure. But back to the text, he says, even when they compete, religions and ideologies have increasingly done so in terms of and for the sake of principles that seem, when viewed from a historical perspective, more and more to involve semantic and not substantive differences. This is not to deny that practice has often widely differed. It is, however, remarkable that conflicts have been waged over competitive claims to a superior interpretation and application of such universal values as democracy, welfare, individual dignity, and personal freedom. Yeah, the conflicts have been waged over those things, but was it those things, or was it what was being done in the name of those things? Okay. It's all well and good to say, well, you know, the enemies of the West just hate democracy because they want to establish a patriarchal one world system that is, an Islamic kind of patriarchal caliphate over the whole globe. But as Zbig and his buddies in the Trilateral Commission point out, like, what is democracy? It's in crisis. What does it actually mean? And is it actually what we claim it to be? So again, these words get thrown out and cast around and used willy-nilly and never or very rarely do we actually stop to think and interrogate and question what is actually underneath this word as it's getting wielded and used out there, you know. So the next section is called The Universal Religions. He says, the crucial breakthrough in the development of human self-awareness on a mass scale came with the great religions, the first universal syntheses that simultaneously expanded man's vision both vertically and horizontally. Vertically, to define in extended and complex terms man's relationship to a God that was not a small group's alone, but everyone's. Horizontally, to articulate a series of imperatives that governed man's obligations to man on the grounds that all shared the divine spark. Universalism thus emerged as a state of mind even at a time when man was still provincial and isolated in mutually exclusive social cultural compartments. Accordingly, the birth of the universal religions represents the appearance of humanity qua humanity. The assertion of man's equality before God in terms of his spirit, his conscience, or his soul laid the basis for the transcendental importance of the human being and for the much later assertion of the equality of men in their political and social dimensions. In that sense, proselytizing Christianity, which universalized the more limited Greek and Judaic tradition, was a particularly revolutionary force and was viewed as such by established authority, in spite of the distinction it made between equality before God and obeisance to Caesar on Caesar's terms. If human history can be said to involve both a struggle and an evolution toward the progressive liberation of man, then the attainment of equality before the supernatural was the first major step on that road. Yeah, it's very, very interesting survey of the history of these kind of things, right? I mean, I kind of feel like people innately have a conscience and they know what's good and what's bad. You know, I do think most people are born with that and just can experience it, and they just know they have a conscience. I don't think you necessarily need to join a church and be part of a religion, but that does give a framework that justifies and explains where it comes from. Okay, but I've been told my son's not old enough, but I've been told that children sort of just have an innate sense of right and wrong. Very young children will get upset and cry if you take something off them, i.e. if you steal from them, because that thing is theirs, right? And likewise, they'll very innately know to share, and that's a good thing, and that's kind, and that's and what generosity is. So I do think there's like an innate sense of right and wrong, and an innate intuition to treat others well as one wants to be treated. For most people, like I said, there's psychopaths and sociopaths out there, and plenty of people who are sort of defective and lacking that innate moral compass, that compassion. Compass and compassion, they have a similar, they have the same root, you know. But that's just my opinion. Continuing, he says, but early man could neither control nor comprehend either himself or his environment. Both were essentially a mystery, a given to be accepted, whatever the pains of life might be. As a consequence, the distant future became a much more intense object of preoccupation than the immediate present. The inability to cope effectively with disease, plagues, infant mortality, a short lifespan, or natural disasters such as floods and crop blights prompted man to seek refuge in all-encompassing definitions of his reality. Yeah, that's the Hobbesian, life was nasty, brutish and short. But again, you have to ask the question, was it? What do we know? Was it history? What is his story? It's his story, right? As Alan says, his story, the story of who, right? So sometimes that is rolled out as an excuse to be grateful for what you have. And I'm not saying don't be grateful for what you have, but sometimes you talk to people about these kinds of ideas and these long rolling plans and agendas, and they'll tell you, yeah, but everything was absolutely terrible in the past. everybody was dying all the time. Nobody could survive. Everyone was hungry and starving, and things are so much better now. Look, we got Netflix, we got McDonald's, we've got all the mod cons and the conveniences and the comforts of the modern world. Things are so much better today than they used to be. So poo-poo on your conspiracy theories about small group of dominant elites kind of controlling things and taking us down a path of slavery. Okay, and so that's an argument that's out there, but that's kind of built on this idea that things were always terrible in the past, or much, much, much worse in the past. Might be true, might not be true. I don't know. Depends how much faith you put in history books, I suppose, right? How well read you are, and what you choose to consume and believe and think and read about the past, because it's a bit of a mystery. There's a lot of confusion put out there when you look at who writes the books, who puts them into our hands. It's hard to get at the truth of what things were like in the past, and I think the further back in the past you go, the harder it is. But this is nevertheless a key part of the narrative, the present day. Like, nasty Brutus in short. Floods, crop blights, etc., plagues, disease, infant mortality. He says, these in turn provided at least partial justification for the view that human endeavor was futile and for the necessity of accepting events with fatalism. By taking refuge in an autonomous, distant, divine future, man relieved himself of the obligation to struggle intensely with the present under circumstances he was neither intellectually nor practically prepared for. Another way of looking at it as well might be that let's just theorize for a second here, if there were this small priesthood of controllers who had that knowledge of mass manipulation and civilizational creation, who could give cultures to peoples, and in order to convince them to pay their taxes, and so that this tiny minority could live off the work and the labor of the slaves without the slaves kicking back and organizing and overturning and overruling and having a casting off of this parasitical class, right? One of the ways you might keep that system going is to put out this idea of like, no, it's really it's the divine future, this autonomous, distant, divine future that you need to focus on. Don't worry about the present and the material conditions you're living in now and the strife and the struggle that you're undergoing now. Because all you need to focus on is the afterlife and what that's going to be like, and prepare yourself for that, So I think it's an interesting experiment to think, was that idea put out there to make people content and comfortable with their slavery? Well, things are kind of crap here in this reality, but at least in the next one, if I pay my taxes and if I give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and keep my nose clean and be good and never lie and never fight anyone and never, especially don't fight, the parasite class. Don't attack those people, because attacking people is bad, and thou shalt not murder, and just focus on what you got and be grateful and say your prayers and do good now and be good and be obedient now, then good things will happen in the next life, right? You could just see it as a mechanism. You could see how that could be a mechanism of control and would benefit a certain group, right? I think. That's not to make any comment on whether or not it's true. I don't know what the next life contains. I'm sure there is one, and something is going to happen, and this isn't it. I believe that. But if you were a dominant priesthood and a tiny parasitic class that wanted to keep everybody else paying their dues and under control, be a good idea to propagate that message. I think that's what I'd do. So, yeah, another spin on kind of this little bit here, but let's continue. Oh, he's going on about free will next. Goody. Even the notion of free will, a central component of the most activist of the great religions, Christianity. What? What does that mean? Okay, so Zbigniew Brzezinski is saying that Christianity is the most activist of the great religions. I'm going to underline that and put a question mark next to it because I'm not quite sure what he's getting at with that. Because sometimes this feeds into nicely the discussion on Huntington earlier, right? Which is like it's okay for Huntington to write a book to say Islam is a threat to the West. But if you grow up in the West, you get this message that like, oh, Christianity is responsible for all this terrible stuff. You know, the Crusades, and they were torturing witches, etc., etc., etc. And you should feel bad as a Western white person for the horrors committed in the name of Christianity. And then you always see priests in films and TV shows. They're bumbling idiots, or they're the bad guys, or they're psychopaths, or they're violent, or whatever. Happens again and again and again, really. But you never see any holy man of any other faith depicted in such a way, right? Or you might see a rabbi. I'm thinking, I can't remember the specific examples, but I think there's some examples of rabbis being bad or psychopathic and being the bad guy, but you never see an imam, to my knowledge. That could be, I don't watch everything that's put out there, so I might be wrong, but I can think of loads of examples where you see Christian priests from the Catholic faith, from whatever Protestant faith, and being even Orthodox. I've seen examples of them being used as like gangsters or criminal masterminds, and that's deliberate. It's put out there on purpose. So, yeah, it's just interesting. I've never heard of Christianity being called the most activist of the great religions. What does he mean by activist? Does he mean going out and trying to convert people? I think if that's what he means, then I don't know. Maybe it is. It might be. Anyway, even the notion of free will, a central component of Christianity, basically involved an inner act of conscience, necessary for the state of grace, rather than a point of departure for morally motivated external action. Right, so he's talking about this inner conscience. No stress was placed on the struggle to improve external conditions because the unstated assumption was that they could not be fundamentally improved. And isn't that a wonderful idea to spread amongst the slaves, right? No point doing anything about the physical external conditions because there's nothing that can be done because we got it locked down. So might as well worry about your internal state and pray for something nice to happen to you after you're dead, right? The emphasis was on the inner man. By riveting his attention on the universal and the divine future, man could master the present by simply ignoring it. This is like Machiavellian mind control 101. Minimum social action was matched by maximum commitment to the supernatural. To meet the central need of their time, mainly to provide man with a firm mooring in a world which could not be comprehended, and to assert firm control over man's spirit, religious beliefs crystallized into dogmas and were organized into institutions. There's a footnote at the bottom here, which I'll read. It says, I do not propose, nor do I feel qualified to become involved in the debate among Marxists, Freudians, and Jungians concerning the autonomy and the functionality of religious development. My concern here is with the emergence of a conceptual and institutional framework for defining man's relationship to his reality. So he's opting out of weighing in on on the really heavy debates going on about religious development and its function. It's interesting he talks about the autonomy of religious development, right? I take that to mean, did it arise through discovery and exploration using logic and observation, right? Was it something that was determined through the scientific method, in other words? Meaning, like, did people look at evidence and whittle it down until what was left was, religious, so the tenets of the religion? Or was it crafted and designed and handed to people? That's how I read that the autonomy, I could be way off base there, but anyway, back to the text. We were at that little circle footnote there. So we're here. The more individually demanding the religion, the higher was the degree of institutionalization. This has prompted the analogies made by a number of scholars between Islam and Christianity on the one hand and communism on the other. With the institutionalization came more activism, the Crusades and the holy wars of Islam. There you go. The Holy Wars of Islam got a mention. But in Zbignew's estimation, the Crusades constituted more activism than the Holy Wars of Islam did. And the exercise of muscle by religious organizations on their environment. Power was asserted, however, to extend the conquest of the spirit, not to effect social change. The institutionalization of belief thus combined two functions. It was the zealot's self-defense mechanism against a non-believing environment, and it was a tool for sustained proselytization, one designed not only to win over adherents, but to overcome the inertial resistance of the masses who were largely indifferent to spiritual requirements. Although Christianity has been the most activist of the great religions and has thereby laid the basis for the subsequent secular revolutionary movements that have dominated Western history, the process of institutionalization and hence the emergence on the part of organized religion of a stake in the status quo has tended to mute the radical message in the Christian concept of history, the movement towards salvation on earth as in heaven. Thus, in practice, the Christian churches have gradually come to accept social stratification and even to benefit from it, as in Latin America. And some Lutheran varieties have even come to sanction in dogma concepts of racial inequality that are at extreme variance with the initial egalitarian revolution represented by the new Christian relationship between God and man. Okay. That paragraph is quite a mouthful, but he's saying just basically what he said up here, which is that he worded so well. What was it back here? Where did he put it? Basically that ignore it. There. By simply ignoring it. So all these institutions were created and built up, and all these money making. In America, is it 501Cs or something? All these charities, all these basically corporations, but they take your money every week and all the money comes in. And he says all this was built up and none of it is really concerned with making things better here and challenging the true sources of corruption and power and control and manipulation and slavery in the world, right? He says that the other great religions have been more passive, both in practice and in theory. Buddhism does not contain imperatives for social change, but offers salvation from reality. Unlike Christianity, nirvana did not serve as a springboard for temporal activism. Well, no, they were just, rocking out on their guitars and releasing the grunge music. Kidding. Nirvana. Get it? But yeah, he's saying the Buddhism and nirvana concept didn't really lead to temporal activism, so changing things in the world. It was more like, the Buddhism thing is the same message. It's like, if you desire things to be different, that's going to cause you pain. So stop desiring things to be different and accept them as they are, and you will find peace. Similarly, Islam's dominant strain of fatalism has worked against the presence of at least that element of tension between eternal peace and heaven on earth that is so strong in Christianity and that has prompted its repressed activism. Heavy stuff in that last section, but food for thought indeed. Very interesting. We've got a few quotes. I hope they're all good. I can't scan them quickly enough to read them out, but thank you for leaving them. I appreciate it very much. I'm going to carry on next with the section, the national identity. So he's just gone after religions. He's going to tell us about nations now and how they're not doing anything. You can see where it's going. At the end, it's going to be like, we need a one world government to solve these problems for everyone that religions and nations can't solve. Well, I don't know. There seems to be the general thrust of a lot of these kinds of books, but we'll see. The next section is the national identity. With the growth in the West of man's ability to master his environment, secular rationalism accompanied by... Sorry, I just got to pause on this phrase, master his environment. What does that mean? Well, by building cities, as Alan Watts says, artificial beehives, where people behave by being monitored and surveilled every day through the CCTV networks. standing up, standing in line, queuing up, following the traffic lights, being told when to stop and when to start, when to go, the green light, the red light, sticking to their lane, following the arrows on the ground, telling you, during the COVID days, stand here, this distance apart from other people, right? This idea that we've mastered our environment and the evidence of that is the city. If mastering your environment would be living in harmony with nature, growing your own food, keeping your own animals, making the place better than it was when you found it, having some sort of water, access to clean water, having your own energy, control of your own energy production on site. You would be a self-contained little unit, or maybe a community even. At a community level, but not the city level. The city as evidence of the master of us being the master of our environment is laughable. I don't know if he's talking about cities, but I'm just interpreting that. But anyway, in the West, man's ability to master his environment has grown, along with secular rationalism, accompanied by a greater awareness of social complexity, as well as by a breakdown in the existing structure of religious allegiance, emerged to challenge institutionalized religion. That religious allegiance simultaneously rested on the narrowness and on the universalism of man's horizons. The narrowness derived from massive ignorance, illiteracy, and a vision confined to the immediate environment by limited communications. The universalism was provided by the acceptance of the idea that man's destiny is essentially in God's hands, and that the limited present is but a stepping stone to an unlimited future. Emerging secularism challenged both dimensions, and in so doing required for the external projection of man's identity an intermediary focus on loyalty, something in between the immediate and the infinite. The nation-state and nationalism were the responses. The doctrine of sovereignty created the institutional basis for challenging the secular authority of established religion, and this challenge in turn paved the way for the emergence of the abstract conception of the nation-state. Sovereignty vested in the people instead of sovereignty vested in the king was the consummation of the process which, in the 2 centuries preceding the French and American revolutions, radically altered the structure of authority in the West. So he's telling us that the structure was radically altered, but I'm not sure it was. I think we're still in a pyramid. I think, that some middle classes kind of arose and got comfortable. But even back in the days of royalty, you had the royal family at the top, and then you had the aristocratic class underneath, and then the slaves at the bottom. I think it's always been a pyramidal structure. I don't think there's been such a radical shift or change. Maybe in the way it's described and defined, there's been a rebranding. There's been a change in people's minds, but in actual fact of reality, the structure's made pretty much intact, I think. But there's a footnote here. Let's see what he says. It's a quote from Huntington. Here he is. It's a quote from Huntington. It's a long one, but it's page 102. It doesn't say what book. It can't be Clash of Civilizations because that was a 1990s publication. So we'll see anyway. It says, in both its religious and its secular versions, in Filmer as well as in Hobbes, the import of the new doctrine of sovereignty was the subject's absolute duty of obedience to his king. Both doctrines helped political modernization by legitimizing the concentration of authority and the breakdown of the medieval pluralistic political order. They were the 17th century counterparts of the theories of party supremacy and national sovereignty, which are today employed to break down the authority of traditional local, tribal, and religious bodies. In the 17th century, mass participation in politics still lay in the future. Hence, rationalization of authority meant concentration of power in the absolute monarch. In the 20th century, the broadening of participation and the rationalization rationalization of authority occur simultaneously, and hence authority must be concentrated in either a political party or in a popular charismatic leader, both of which are capable of arousing the masses as well as challenging traditional sources of authority. But in the 17th century, the absolute monarch was the functional equivalent of the 20th century's monolithic party. Okay. So I'm kind of getting this image of what you were in. You were in a family, in a community, and that community would probably belong to some sort of church, or synagogue or mosque, and that would be a community, and you would be loyal to the community. And then when that was no longer serving its purpose, they brought in the nation state, and then your loyalty to the nation would supersede your loyalty to your community or your little church group. And now that the nation state has been used and worn out, its loyalty to a particular zone, an area, right? A conglomeration of nation states, whether that's your BRICS or your European Union or I don't know what it's called, but it's like Mexico, America, and Canada. And it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Eventually, now it's time for loyalty, absolute loyalty and obedience to the world, to the globe. You are a global citizen, above and beyond, first and foremost, more than anything else. This is what children are taught. You go into schools and they have rainbows and pictures of the globe and little cartoons of children of all different colors holding hands in a little circle around the globe. And they get taught that you have to first and foremost be a global citizen. And that overrides your belonging to your own family, to your own neighborhood, your own community, your own religious group, whatever that may be. So this is kind of like the stepping stones. You can see it getting on a bigger and larger scale until, I don't know, in 1,000 years from now, it's going to be like solar system. We're talking about globalism now. It'll be like solar systemism. They're trying to break down our loyalty to the earth and make us be members of the solar system federation of planets or whatever. You could just see it going on ad infinitum. And then after that, it'll be galaxy, loyalty to the galaxy, and you are a loyal subject of the Galactic Federation. And this is why they put out Star Trek, right? So many episodes and series and iterations of Star Trek to prepare you for that. That's their next scam. You heard it here first. It's coming. Watch out for it. Warn your children and their grandchildren. Don't buy into it. Anyway, back to the text. He says, we had that little footnote, but the rest of that sentence was about preparing the ground for a new dominant concept of reality. Yeah, so you have to pave the way before you implant these new ideas in people's minds, right? You have to get them doubting, and you have to get them questioning, and you have to point things out to them that they hadn't thought of on their own. Like, don't you think it's a bit weird that these priestly class has all this money, and and that all these scandals that have been happening around what they've been getting up to, and you start to expose and shine a light on those things, on those cracks, which previously were poo-pooed and disregarded and not spoken of openly, and you were attacked if you tried to point those things out. Now suddenly you're allowed to talk about them. And it's because they're preparing you for the next thing, the next object that you are going to be loyal to, the next source of inspiration and character. What am I trying to say? You're the next building block in your identity, because people submit it into they don't submit it. That's the wrong word. They submit to it, but they absorb it into their identity. And so people will say, I'm a ... I'm a Englishman, right? Meaning I've taken on board my my loyalty to England as a country, which is just a concept that people have come up with, like he says here. It's just a what's the word that he used? I'm getting myself tied up in knots trying to read this complicated book and comment on it at the same time. But it's a concept. It's a concept of reality, and you're given one, and then that one's broken down to make way for the next one. And it's all, I think, in my opinion, by design, done on purpose by the people who do that sort of thing. They have that knowledge, they have that ability, they have that step-by-step process on how it works. And that's what they've been doing this whole time. But anyway, the new dominant concept of reality is, so continuing, the nation state became simultaneously the embodiment of personal commitments and the point of departure for analyzing reality. There you go. This development marked a new phase in man's political consciousness. Nationalism did not seek to direct the individual toward the infinite, but to activate the impersonal masses for the sake of immediately proximate goals. Paradoxically, these concrete goals were derived from the still intangible and transcendental, though new, object of worship, the nation. The nation became the source of ecstatic, lyrical affection, and it was this highly emotional relationship, symbolized by the new anthems, flags, and heroes that served to energize the populace. What was I saying? I honestly have never read this book before, but I'm just getting. I think I'm just channeling Zbigniew this week, like I did last week. The concrete goals took the form of massive preoccupation with frontiers, so that's your borders. Irredenta, don't know what that means. Brethren to be regained from foreign captivity, and more generally, the power and the glory of the state as the formal expression of the nation. The state thus became the institutional form for the new dominant belief, with a monopolistic claim on the active dedication to it of man, now designated first and above all as the citizen. It's this kind of thing that makes me, I don't like using the word citizen, but I'm never quite sure what word to use in its stead. But yeah, that's it. It's another concept, and baked into it is this idea that you are loyal above, first and foremost, above and beyond all else to the state and a subject of the state. The designation man the citizen symbolically marks another milestone in the evolution of man as a social being. Equality before God was now matched by equality before the law. Spiritual egalitarianism was now reinforced by legal egalitarianism. It is of note that legal equality was asserted both by the American Revolution, which supplemented its stress on equality before the law with a strong attachment to religious values. Indeed, it derived the former from the latter, and by the French Revolution, which constructed its pantheon of human equality by explicitly rejecting the religious tradition. In both cases, the legal equality of the citizen was postulated as a universal principle, and thus it marked another giant step in the progressive redefinition of man's nature and place in our world. I mean, but all of this sounds all very well and good, and it's lovely, and it's probably the kind of history you get taught in your school. But this is all for the profane, right? This is all for the mass man and woman. This is all for Joe and Jane, average. Because throughout all of this, the first phase of the religions, the universal religions, the second phase of the nation state, the phase we're going into of the global system, and then the phase after that, the interplanetary system. Thank you, LJ. During all of those phases, there's still this tiny clique of dominant elites rolling out pushing these ideas, preparing people's minds, engineering the minds of the masses to go along with this stuff, and utilizing their methods of propaganda and brainwashing and intimidation and bullying and coercion and all these other things that they do, right? But I think the fact that Brzezinski, he doesn't leave it out in its entirety, because he did talk about the nature of the new elite in that quote that we looked at the beginning. He does talk about the nature of this new elite, but he doesn't sort of acknowledge that they've existed and always have existed, and they've been doing this, and they're at the root of it. He's painting this picture of this like progress, this story of progress, right? Progress is a good thing, and progressivism is always good, but progressing towards what? And who's planning this journey that we are on and that we are progressing along? Who planned this route? And for what purpose and to what ends are we barreling along And progress is always good, no matter what. Don't you question progress. It's always good. That's progress. But let's go back to this section. What time have we got? Let's see. Might be able to do... Oh, we should be able to finish this. We'll aim to finish this if I can stop interrupting myself. So, with nationalism, the distinction between the inner contemplative man concerned with his relationship to God and the external man concerned with shaping his environment became blurred. Nationalism as an ideology was more activist. Man's relations to man were objectivized externally by legal norms and were not dependent, as was man's relation to God, on personal conscience, unfortunately. If it were, things might be a little bit better. Maybe. Yet, at the same time, the definition of man as a national was based largely on abstract, historically determined and highly emotional criteria. Yes, they have to drum up the emotions. They have to get you feeling proud and patriotic and loyal and all that good stuff so that you'll, pick up a gun and go and kill some innocent people over in that other country when we tell you to. So yeah, very important, the emotional manipulation and control of people. This outlook, continuing, involved considerable vagueness and even irrationality when used as a conceptual framework within which relations between nations and developments within nations might be understood. Nationalism only partially increased men's self-awareness. It mobilized them actively, but failed to challenge their critical faculties. It was more a mass vehicle for human passion and fantasizing than a conceptual framework that made it possible to dissect and then deliberately reassemble our reality. So that's a great phrase, isn't it? The dissection and reassembling of reality. Who is doing that? Who has the knowledge and the skills and the impact and the clout and the ability to do that? It's not the everyday person. So this is the last section of this part of this chapter, which is part 2, chapter 1, and it's called Ideological Universalism. That is why Marxism represents a further vital and creative stage in the maturing of man's universal vision. Marxism is simultaneously a victory of the external active man over the inner passive man and a victory of reason over belief. It stresses man's capacity to shape his material destiny, finite and defined as man's only reality, and it postulates the absolute capacity of man to truly understand his reality as a point of departure for his active endeavors to shape it. To a greater extent than any previous mode of political thinking, Marxism puts a premium on the systematic and rigorous examination of material reality, and on guides to action derived from that examination. Though it may be argued that this intellectually rigorous method was eventually subverted by its strong component of dogmatic belief, that stinks of like, Marxism, it's just never been done properly. It would be really good, but it's just never been done properly. Which is the same thing people say, free market capitalism, it would be the perfect system. It's just never been done properly. But that's what it's sort of sounding like to me. The dogmatic belief component, unfortunately, subverted an intellectually rigorous method. Marxism did expand popular self-awareness by awakening the masses to an intense preoccupation with social equality and by providing them with both a historical and a moral justification for insisting upon it. More than that, Marxism represented in its time the most advanced and systematic method for analyzing the dynamic of social development, for categorizing it, and for extrapolating from it certain principles concerning social behavior. It did so in a manner that lent itself to translation into highly simplified principles that provided even the relatively uneducated with the feeling that their understanding of phenomena had been basically sharpened and that their resentments, frustrations, and vague aspirations could be channeled into historically meaningful actions. That's a great bit because he's talking about how this was just a feeling. Yeah, they felt that was the case, but actually they were being manipulated by the same elites that manipulate everyone all the way through all of history. but they had a feeling, they had a good feeling about it, right? And they felt empowered and they felt like they were making a difference, just like the SJW, social justice warriors of the present day, and the, climate activists, just stop oil type people of the present day. They have this feeling of making a difference and being involved in something historically important and meaningful, right? And that's totally artificial. It's totally cooked up and implanted in them by the social engineers, by the institutes, the think tanks, the Tavistockian type nudge units that exist out there. So, yeah, it's a feeling. It's not reality. Feelings can deceive and be, what's a good word? Misleading, let's say. They can be hacked. I just saw mind hack your name, and yeah, feelings can be hacked. That's a good way to put it, right? Your feelings can be hacked and used against you. And you got to be hyper alert and aware of your feelings when they arise, what causes them to arise, and observe is the first step. And I don't know what the rest of the steps are, but you got to start by observing it. And when you get that hot flush, or you get that knot in your stomach, or you get that sweaty palm, or whatever it is, observe it and think, am I being manipulated? That's probably step 2. Ask that question. And then step 3 is answer it honestly, brutally honestly. There you go. There's a new 3-step process for you to take away and share with your friends tonight that I just made up on the spot. All right. Continuing. Because of this, Marxism appealed simultaneously to man's ethical, rational, and Promethean instincts. Promethean. The ethical component sustained by man's emotions drew on the Judeo-Christian heritage. And I'll just throw in as well a little tidbit that I know that we have Orthodox friends in the Christian Orthodox friends in the audience, and the Orthodox Christians take exception to this. There is no Judeo-Christian, like there's Christian, and Judaism is another thing. It's separate. They're not the same thing. But this phrase Judeo-Christian gets thrown around all the time, and I know that they take exception to that because I've talked to them about it before. So I just think it's worth mentioning that little factoid? I don't know what the word is, but there you are. So the ethical component, sustained by man's emotions, drew on the Judeo or the Judaic/Christian heritage. The rational responded to man's increased desire to comprehend the dynamic of his material environment more systematically, and the Promethean stood for man's faith in his powers, for the notion that history is made by the people and that nothing, history is made by the people. Yeah, his story is made by the, okay, sure. And that nothing can hem in their advance to perfection. Yes, man can be perfected. We got to know where this comes from, this quote. It's footnote 8. The language is very telling. Footnote 8, part 2 is The Dynamic 20th Century by K.H. Momjan, 1968 book, page 21. Never heard of it. Never heard of it. But, yes, the Promethean push, the Promethean instinct. Interesting. So, in this sense, Marxism has served as a mechanism of human quote-unquote progress, even if its practice has often fallen short of its ideals. Often, every single time, all the time, every time it's been tried. Till Howard de Chardin notes at one point that, monstrous as it is not modern totalitarianism really the distortion of something magnificent, and thus quite near to the truth? Elsewhere, he observes that, quote, all the peoples, to remain human or to become more so, are inexorably led to formulate the hopes and problems of the modern earth in the very same terms in which the West has formulated them. What he does not say is that for many outside the immediate influence of the West and its Christian tradition, it has been Marxism that has served to stir the mind and to mobilize human energies purposefully. So I would just slightly alter that. It has been Marxism that has been used deliberately to stir the mind and mobilize human energies purposefully, right? Because it was just another one of all of the many systems of thought and philosophies that were designed for a purpose to achieve an outcome and unleashed upon people, sold to people, and people bought it and then went along with it and did exactly what the planners wanted them to do, right? Moreover, Marxism has decisively contributed to the political institutionalization and systemization of the deliberate effort to define the nature of our era and of man's relationship to history at any given stage in that history. Emphasis on this question has compelled reflection on the relative importance of different forces of change, the weighing of alternative historical interpretations, and at least the attempt at tentative judgment. Moreover, it has provoked a series of subordinate questions, all helpful in forcing recognition of change and in compelling adjustments to it. Within the given era, what particular phases can be deciphered? Is any given phase one of international tension, of greater stability, of shifting locale of conflict, of a new set of alliances? Who are our present principal foes, subjectively and objectively? Who are now our allies on the grand chessboard? He didn't say that, I just added that in to be a bit facetious about he's focusing on the black and white spaces and the black pieces and the white pieces and just leaving out and ignoring entirely, the people playing the game, moving the pieces around. What are the sources of principal, secondary, and tertiary dangers? Periodic, formal, purposeful examination of such questions compels systematic probing of the international scene. This is not to say that contemporary communists have always been successful in accurately perceiving the meaning of new international phenomena. Indeed, their conviction that their analytical tools provide a faultless guide to the inner meaning of things has often led them astray. Unwilling to accept the notion of the relativity and elusiveness, relativity of truth. There you go. So, the relativity of truth? Truth is not relative. They have elevated their inescapably partial insights into absolute dogmas and reduced complex issues to gross oversimplifications. Nonetheless, to define communism, the institutionalized expression of Marxism, primarily as, quote, a disease of the transition from traditional to modern status, or to assert that Marxism is in fact nothing but an epiphenomenon of technical development, a phase of the painful marriage of man and technique, is to neglect what will probably remain the major contribution of Marxism, its revolutionary and broadening influence, which opened man's mind to previously ignored perspectives and dramatized previously neglected concerns. To say as much is not to ignore the subsequently enslaving effect of institutionalized Marxism, especially when in power, or its analytical inability to cope with the problems of the advanced 20th century world. It is to assert that in the gradual evolution of man's universal vision, Marxism represents as important and progressive a stage as the appearance of nationalism and of the great religions. So notice that he talks about the evolution of man's universal vision and the progressive stage. So, what he's saying here is we're progressing, we're evolving, we're going to something better, we're going to something, because evolution, we are taught, results in more complex life and more advanced life. And look, and here we are, and we've got iPhones, and we've got, I'm looking around for the example that's used. We've got democracy, we've got liberal democracy and iPhones, and we've got hormone blockers, and we got the contraceptive pill, and look at what amazing fruits and bounties that evolution has led to, and it can only get better from here if we just keep evolving. And it's painted, and that evolution is one of these blind forces, these impersonal forces that these kind of writers often refer to as being the driving force behind world events. Whereas my feeling, along with other people's, Alan Watts' feeling, would be that no, these are not blind impersonal forces. These are the results of planners, people with knowledge, people with schemes and influence and power and motivations, and it has always been that way, right? But he's just painting that picture of things are just evolving, and we're just going from stage to stage, and progress is inevitable, and the next thing is just a natural next stage, right? Continuing. In all three cases, religion, nationalism, and Marxism, the breakthrough had many antecedents. Is it antecedents or antecedents? I'm not sure. And did not suddenly come about as the result of an entirely autonomous act of creative genius. Oh. Marx capitalized on the intellectual achievements of his immediate predecessors, for some of whom socialism had a strong religious basis. Similarly, nationalism and the great religions were the articulate syntheses of moods, of attitudes, and of a certain social receptivity that had matured over a very long period of time. Also, in all three cases, the breakthrough in perception was followed by perversion in practice. Religious wars and the Inquisition, national hatreds expressed in unprecedented mass slaughter, brutal terror, purges, and totalitarian subjugation of the mind as well as the body in the name of a, quote, humanist ideology. That reminds me as well that I was reading UNESCO, Its Purpose and Philosophy, Julian Huxley, and he's always gone on about humanism, isn't he? Scientific humanism has to be the guiding force and principle of UNESCO. I think he calls it scientific humanism. Anyway. Nevertheless, in all three cases, the intellectual horizons of man, once widened, could not again be narrowed. Equality before a universal God and the emphasis on individual conscience, equality before the law and a commitment to a social entity larger than the immediate one, social equality and a concern for analytically dissecting the dynamic thrust of history, all have cumulatively helped to refine and enlarge man's political and social consciousness. Given the dominant role of the activist West in shaping the outlook of our times, now in the second half of the 20th century, almost everyone, often without knowing it, is to some extent a Christian, a nationalist, and a Marxist. Mic drop. So that's page 75. We made it another 12 pages tonight. Yeah, we did. No, we did 10 pages tonight. So absolutely failed on my goal of trying to pick up the pace and move through this a little bit faster. But sometimes you gotta chew on things a little bit. You gotta ruminate and digest and let the saliva and the enzymes do its bit in preparing the food for proper, smooth digestion. But another fascinating section. So we are all some combination of Christian, nationalist, Marxists. It's really great to read this kind of book and hear this account of reality and history. I hope I picked apart a few of the I don't want to say it, maybe fallacies is not the right word, but certainly the way these operators influence is by leaving things out. Often it's by omission. It's lies by omission. So leaving things out. Hopefully, I've put some of those missing pieces back in and pointed out some of the language that's being used. I think he's quite honest about quite a lot of it, and that's why he impressed David Rockefeller and was recruited and approached and funded and supported to set up the Trilateral Commission, of course, because he is giving us a lot of truth. But like all good careerists, you got to know what to say and what not to say, what questions you can ask, what questions you can't ask, right? Which things are the quiet part you shouldn't say out loud, and my new phrase, which is the loud part that you write down and publish in books, right? So yeah, I think it's a really fascinating study to go through this book. I'm enjoying it very much. I'm glad people in the chat are saying the pace is good, because these are big, weighty ideas. Some of these sentences are long, and there's a lot of concepts thrown in there. And like for such a slender little paperback, there's so much in here. The footnotes as well, so much to dig into and to learn. It's brilliant. I'm really glad that everybody who voted in the poll picked this book to go through first. It's certainly helping me stretch my ability to talk about and describe these things, and my narration skills are being tested, because some of these sentences are kind of long and wordy, to say the least. But I'm enjoying the book very much, and I'm very grateful to everyone who is hanging out in the chats tonight. We got Turbs, Armory One, and Heidi over on Rumble, and all the usual crew on YouTube. I think I mentioned everybody. I didn't see anybody pop up who I haven't already said hello to. But I'm grateful to have you all here for sure. Yeah, another fantastic section. What to say? I think I said everything in comments as we went along there, but it's this presentation of the hidden hand is not included in his description of how things work. He doesn't talk about how Marx was funded and commissioned to come up with his theory and to publish it. And I have a copy of the Communist Manifesto. It's a reprint, 1975, but it does say in the front that this was printed in China. This copy, it's a second printing. Printed in the People's Republic of China. But it does say in here that the manifesto was commissioned. I forget where it was. So it wasn't just like a couple of geniuses sitting around thinking, I want to make the world a better place for the workers of the world, right? No. There was funding, there was planning, there was intention. They realized they needed this thing. They needed an ideology. Somebody needed to write it. Some name needed to be put on it. It needed to be rolled out and disseminated and spread around for a specific purpose. And that's what all of these ideologies are. In my opinion, that's what every framework that exists is to some greater or lesser degree. Now, there's often a baby in the bathwater that we shouldn't throw out. In all of these systems and all of these ideologies, I think otherwise people would not buy into them and go along with them and murder each other over them and defend them with their life, right? There has to be baby in that bathwater. So it's about identifying that baby and protecting it and and nurturing it and taking that and saving it when you throw out the bathwater. And too often people get into binaries and they'll be like, no, communism is a load of shit, or Christianity is a load of nonsense, or whatever, without doing the work, the due diligence of going in and understanding and learning and getting familiar with the tenets of the thinking and the philosophy and the ideas and the information and the history and the legacy of those isms, let's call them, whatever it is, whether it's a philosophical, economic, political, whatever, and going in and picking apart the good from the bad and taking the decent bits out, taking the bits that you can empathize with and that you can use and that seem to apply and that are true, right? So that's the hard work. That's tricky. People don't want to do that. They'd rather just say, nope, I'm going to throw that whole thing out and I'm going to adhere myself to this thing 100%. And that's easier because it's black and white. But black and white is the checkerboard. It's the dialectic. That's the kind of the simplistic easy way of doing things. And, we're not about simplistic, easy ways on this channel. We're about getting into it, questioning things, turning it around, looking at it from different angles. And I don't have all the answers, and I'm not here to give you answers. You have to find those for yourself, following your own creative exploration of what is interesting to you, right? Follow your curiosity. Let it lead you, and see where it takes you. And there's always something to be gained through learning, right? No knowledge is wasted. It is all grist for the mill, to use a phrase that Frank has brought to my attention that I don't use. It's all grist for the mill. It's all valuable information. And the more of it you can gather, the more of an accurate picture of reality you can build. And that's good for you. It's good for the people around you. You can operate more effectively and more efficiently. You can communicate more clearly and succinctly and convincingly. And it's just a good way to proceed. So I thank you all for being here tonight, taking part in my own, I shouldn't say my own, it's really it's our explanation, our learning journey. It's great. It would be nowhere near as fulfilling and exciting and interesting if people weren't tuning in for it. So I want to say thank you for that. I'm going to sign off. A little bit longer tonight than usual, but I'll be back next Friday. We'll be continuing with part 2, chapter 2, which is called Turbulence Within Institutionalized Beliefs. And I can't remember, did I? Oh yeah. So part 2 is the age of volatile belief. That's where we're at. And we're going to be in part 2, chapter 2, next Friday. It's slow going, but I think it's worth it to take our time and properly soak up this information, because it's the more time I'm spending on this book, the more grateful I feel to have a copy, the more blessed I feel to have a copy, but the more I feel it's so interesting with the symbolism, the quote at the beginning, the topics discussed. I do feel like there is something a little bit special about this book. I have a lot of books and I love them all, but some of them are special. Some of them have a little bit more somethingness that I can't quite describe to them. And this is one of those. It's got a little bit of something else to it. It's probably the demonic sigil on the front cover. Yeah. Anyway, thank you for hanging out. Lovely indeed to spend this time with you on a wonderful Friday night. I hope you have a fantastic weekend and do wonderful things with wonderful people. Treat yourselves well. Be kind to yourselves. Love yourselves. Be compassionate and patient and encouraging and loyal to yourself, because you have to have all those things already before you can give them to other people. So if you don't have self-love, it's hard to love other people. If you don't have compassion for yourself and who you are and the person you were in the past and mistakes you made, it's hard to be compassionate for other people. So be good to yourself. Talk to yourself with kind words and kind messages, and be patient and be encouraging, and don't do the negative self-talk, putting yourself down, calling yourself names or any of that kind of thing. We're not here to torture ourselves with our minds, even though so many of us often do end up doing that, right? So stop it and be kind to yourself, and it will then manifest in kindness to other people. And, isn't that what it's all about at the end of the day? So, brilliant to have you all here. Thank you again. And I will see you next Friday, unless you join the book club, in which case I could see you on Wednesday when we continue our reading of First Global Revolution. It's a very similar format. Without the preamble ramble, we just get straight into the book. And if you do join those calls, you get to be on the call and comment in real time and add to the discussion and, take part. Which is it's the next phase of what I'm doing. Phase 1 is sitting here, me talking into the camera, broadcasting out. And then phase 2 is to build groups and communities around and have conversations in real time with other people, because, it's not just about me sitting here yammering on. You all have insights and valuable, interesting things to say and important things to bring to the table. And your opinions, your observations, your life experience are all valuable. And it's worth sharing it and putting it out there. And whether that's with me or with your partner, your friends, colleagues, loved ones, family, whatever, put it out. Because you're going to be gone one day from this place. And The more truth you speak into reality, the better reality becomes, I think. This is my opinion. So I'll leave it at that. Have a good one, everybody. Be good to yourselves and each other. Until next time, God bless.